Here we go, fight fans, for the fight of the century. In the blue corner, wearing the green and red sweater, weighing in at officially 165 pounds, this fighter has survived 7 movies for a perfect record of 7-0. From Springwood, Ohio, the neighborhood nuisance, the Springwood slasher, the nightmare of your nightmares, Freddy Krueger! In the red corner, wearing various tattered garments that he's acquired over the years, weighing in officially at 298 pounds, this fighter has returned from the dead an astonishing 7 times. From Crystal Lake, New Jersey, the champ of camp, the boy who lived, the goalie with the mask that's holy, Jason Voorhees! Horror fans and film fans of all ages, you're all doomed! Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that's been slicing and dicing its way through Friday the 13th movies so long that we're actually talking about Freddy Krueger now. I'm your host, Brian.
And I'm surprisingly wrinkly Greg.
This segment begins with a red glowing New Line logo and ends with a shirtless dude in his boxer shorts laying satisfyingly on his bed.
Before we get into dissecting the movie chunk by chunk like we have, I thought we ought to pause a little bit and talk about Freddy Krueger and A Nightmare on Elm Street. We both separately watched the first one that came out in 1984 recently, and so I'm curious, Brian, what you thought about that movie and your thoughts on Freddy Krueger in general.
Yeah, so that was my first viewing of the original Nightmare movie in, I would say, at least 7 or 8 years. And, you know, like you, we had discussed this beforehand, but I just felt like it was a good idea to watch it before we got into this season so we could kind of remind ourselves what Freddy was about, what the Nightmare, storyline was all about. And I enjoyed the movie for the most part. It's, for some reason, it seemed a lot cornier this time around. There was things that I found really kind of terrifying and chilling when I was a kid, and now when I watch it, it's just kind of stupid. And I don't know if it's just because I've seen it so many times, I know what to expect, or maybe I've just become jaded because I've seen different types of horror movies over the years. But it's never been one of my favorite horror movies. There were things that I liked about it, and there's things I still do like about it. It's just, for this particular viewing, it just kind of struck me as a little sillier than I remember.
I was surprised. Wes Craven's awesome. He's a genius. He's done a lot of really cool stuff, and it's a very inventive movie. But I was surprised at how kind of crudely it was made. I'm guessing a lot of that has to do with budget, but it's not a movie that fares well in the high def era. A lot of the effects are a little janky, and they probably looked better on fuzzy VHS. Like the shot that scared me the most as a kid was Freddy's arms stretching across the alleyway. And I mean, on DVD, that looked like garbage. It's almost hilarious.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way.
And then there were some other things that I'd never really paid attention to before. Like at one point, Freddy is supposed to be wearing Tina's face and peering at Nancy through a hole through a little window in the front door, and then he peels it off, and it's Freddy underneath, and it kind of falls flat. They do it quickly, and it kind of falls flat because it's so obviously a rubber mask that you don't even realize it's supposed to be Tina's face. And I'm not sure that they could have done it any more convincingly in that era, but it's the kind of thing where I think his ideas were outmatched by the limitations they faced. And so it's a little bit quaint. I don't know that a kid, if I was 12 seeing it now, I probably wouldn't be as scared as I was when I saw it at 12 years old in 1986 or whatever. and so it's more about the ideas. And I mean, like they made that remake with Jackie Earle Haley back in like 2010. And I wish they had just used Wes Craven's story and script and maybe freshened the movie effects up or something. I mean, I feel like what he came up with was great and entertaining and scary, but it didn't quite hold up.
That's an interesting idea, because I ended up having some free time and I rewatched the remake with Jackie Earle Haley in the last couple of days. And I'd seen it in the theater when it first came out and then really didn't have any interest in watching it again. And it's not terrible. It really isn't that bad. It does go in some interesting directions. I particularly like the look of Freddy in the remake, actually better, because he looks more like a burn victim rather than someone who's just wearing makeup. And, so the Freddy in the remake is actually pretty damn scary. I wasn't thrilled with the way they handled Freddy's voice in the remake, because you can tell it's either all ADR or they heightened it with, special effects. And so it just never sounds like he's in the room with the people that he's confronting. And so that kind of took away from it, even though I liked the voice overall better than what Robert Englund does. It just seemed more menacing and scary, but it just felt very disconnected from what we were watching. But yeah, the remake is fine. It has its ups and downs, but I do like the idea that you mentioned of like just a true remake, kind of like what they did with Psycho. And it's like, hey, we're just going to do kind of like a shot by shot remake, but with better effects and, different actors. And I think that's an interesting approach, because I do think that the story of the original Nightmare is strong on its own. It's just the way that it was executed.
Yeah, and I mean, that first one, I kind of treat the first one as a standalone. I think I stopped watching them after part 3 because of my impatience with Freddy that we'll get into shortly. But and I saw like the final one, the Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare, just out of curiosity, and that was a train wreck. And then we watched New Nightmare a while ago, which was a great idea, but again, kind of the execution didn't live up to the premise. And so I didn't have a whole lot of interest in the long story of Freddy to begin with. But I did really like the fact, and I'd never really picked up on this before, which probably means I'm a dope. But when I was watching it this time, it struck me how I'm pretty sure that the whole movie is supposed to be Nancy having a Freddy nightmare. I don't think that anything that happened in the real world. I think we saw him just continuing to torture her in the dream world for the entire length of the movie. Even scenes where she wasn't present, she seemed to, be aware of, and that could happen in a dream where you're seeing other people doing things you're not necessarily present. So that was an interesting thing, and leads me to some thoughts about this movie that we'll come to later.
So you had watched this before I did, and you had mentioned that same thing to me. And so I went into this viewing with that in the back of my mind, like, okay, this is all Nancy's nightmare. Does it work? And I think it does. There's holes in this idea that we will, that are in, the Nightmare on Elm Street movie, that are in Freddy versus Jason, that we're going to get into as we start going into this movie. So there's easy ways to kind of pick it apart, but I had no problem with the idea that, yeah, this movie was all Nancy's nightmare. It certainly explains away some of the things that I wouldn't necessarily have gone along with if it was supposed to be reality. So I was fine with it. But the one thing that really jumped out at me from this viewing of the original Nightmare on Elm Street was that, and I'm kind of showing my hand here, but I think it's important to get this out in the open in the first episode, is that I'm not really a Freddy Krueger fan. There's a reason why we're doing a Jason Voorhees podcast, and that's because we like Jason better than Freddy. But I was always under the assumption that it took 2 or 3 movies, like you mentioned, for me to kind of give up or get annoyed with Freddy. But I found myself being annoyed with Freddy almost from the beginning in this first
Oh,
one.
wow.
And I was like, okay, like, and granted, he gets absolutely worse. There's no debating that. As the movies get on, he becomes even more insufferable. But there were things in this movie where I'm just like, there were things I liked that were scary, and then there's just like goofy, stupid shit that he would either say or do that just bugged me. And I'm like, this is just dumb. I don't like this. And this is why, like, I just found myself kind of like pointing at the screen and being like, this is why I don't like Nightmare on Elm Street. Or, this is why I don't like Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I have very little patience for him. And that's not Robert Englund's fault. I think Robert Englund was perfect for that role. And that Freddy has his fans. And, I'm sure that a large number of people who are listening to this love Freddy Krueger, and that's fine. I get that. It's just not it's not to my taste. I don't like that much personality in my killers. And, he's a real creep. They lean into that even more in this movie for reasons we'll discuss. But, he starts off, he's a child killer, but the implication is pretty heavy that he's a child molester. And so, he's just an unsavory character to begin with. And then he's such a yammermouth that he bugs the crap out of me with his corny jokes, and they go over the top with his voice. I appreciate what you said about Jackie Earle Haley's voice in the remake, but even Englund started out with kind of this raspy whisper where, he says, "Nancy, this is God." And that was fine, but then they start going in where he's like, "Welcome to prime time, bitch." And it sounds like Jesse Ventura or something. And it's just, he becomes too much of a cartoon character. There are little moments here and there in the first one that I think he's truly scary, when he's chasing her down the alleyway and he's cackling maniacally in certain scenes. And then there's one in this that we'll come to that I really love, and that's sort of what I wish Freddy had always been. But I'm with you. He a little Freddy goes a long, long way with me. And the biggest problem I have with the Nightmare on Elm Street concept is that nothing Freddy can do to me is as scary as the dream I have where it's the end of the semester and I realize that I haven't been to class because I've lost the schedule and I'm going to get an incomplete.
Yeah, I have that dream at least once or twice a year. Or it's like I've lost my locker combination and there's something in my locker that I need to get. But
right.
Yeah, it's usually a syllabus or something that I find in the bottom of my book bag. And I'm like, wait, what? I was supposed to go to this class? I'm graduating in 3 days.
You haven't read the novel for this final, bitch. So as Brian said, the movie itself kicks off when the black screen becomes a red-tinged New Line Cinema's logo. And I like that the score has a snippet of Freddy's theme, which is then underlined by the ma, 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 ma. That was nice. That was nice and spooky. I liked that a lot. We open up in a boiler room where we see a child's toy doll thrown into the furnace and a scared little girl cowering against the wall while Freddy, unburned Freddy, sharpens a blade that's going to go on his glove. It's Robert Englund, making a rare appearance without the Freddy makeup, wearing just a regular-looking leather jacket, but his signature hat does hang nearby.
I started my side research pretty early with this one. I looked up the name of the furnace, and it's a Curtis Furnace Company. If it is a real company, I couldn't find anything about it, so maybe it's just a reference to someone who worked on the movie, but I just like to think that it's an homage to Curtis Armstrong from Revenge of the Nerds.
Booger? So then we get kind of a voiceover narration by evil Freddy Krueger, kind of laying out his story and how he gains power from the fear of children, and was dubbed the Springwood Slasher. And we kind of get a recap of his whole origin. Meanwhile, we're seeing this little girl killed off camera by pre-burn Freddy. She was played by Joelle Antonison. She had a few credits as a child actor and was last known to be living in British Columbia. He then basically lays out his whole origin story, how as a child killer in Springwood, Ohio, he was basically arrested but not convicted, and the angry parents of victims in the town ganged up and torched the place that he was hiding in one evening. So he was burned alive, and then somehow gained the ability to return from the dead in the dream realm and use the power of his victims to seek revenge on the children of this angry mob. Every once in a while we get this voiceover, they cut to a tight close-up of him, and he's got pretty cool Darth Maul eyes and sharp teeth, and he looks rather demonic, and it's pretty sweet. I like that.
I do want to spend a minute talking about Freddy's origin story, because for me, it's the origin of my issues with Freddy. So he says something about after the parents killed him, he became something much worse, which was the stuff that nightmares are made of. And like right from the beginning, I can't wrap my head around that. I don't know what that means. So like, if he's dead, why would he be in children's nightmares? If anything, there would be relief and a sense of, calm over the community that this killer is dead. And I don't understand why there would continue to be nightmares where I could see him being the stuff of nightmares if people knew that he got away, or people knew that he survived, or that he was still out there somewhere. But this whole origin story lays it out that he's been killed. The parents took, matters into their own hands and took care of Freddy. So he's gone, but now he's like, well, now I'm more powerful because I'm going to be in their nightmares. And there's no clear-cut answer to my issues with this. It's just the kind of the first thing where I just like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand the primary delivery mechanism of like Freddy Krueger into these, victims' worlds.
I think that was that was an explanation in one of the sequels that I never saw, where he struck a bargain with dream demons or some shit.
Okay. That makes total sense.
Right. So it clears it right up. And I think they wisely left that out of this movie, but you're right. It is kind of a big leap that you are then expected to make. And why he would gain power from their fear, which is the central plot point of this whole movie is strange. So he's doing this, he's victimizing these people as a mode of self-preservation instead of just angry revenge. I mean, it's all kind of murky and garbled.
Yeah, but I do love that song, Dream Demons.
Somewhere along the way, the voiceover reveals people stopped being afraid of Freddy Krueger. No one talked about him anymore, and so he lost his powers. And he says he can't come back if they forget. I can't come back if nobody's afraid. So he had to search the bowels of hell, and he found someone to make them afraid. But if they're in hell too, why would they have any greater ability to make people afraid than he does? It's all pretty, pretty glossed over.
Greg, you already said it. The answer is dream demons.
Oh yes, of course. Dream demons that crawl up women's vaginas in basements.
God, let's not talk about that again. One thing that really bugged me about this scene was the appearance of Freddy. He looks even more demonic than normal, and he's got like really bloodshot eyes, and his teeth were actually filed down to fangs. And when I first saw that, I just figured, oh, this is going to be Freddy's appearance in this movie, because even in the Nightmare movies, his appearance changed, to some degree. Like I remember in one of the movies, he wore like a trench coat with the collar turned up or something. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is just the look of Freddy moving forward, but we'll quickly see that that's just not the case. It's just kind of like a weird one-off, look of him.
It pops up one more time later on in the movie, and I sort of took that as maybe that's what his actual demonic infused persona looks like, and the typical kind of pizza face Freddy that we see is what he would look like having been burned in the fire, that the angry mob set, but that truly he's become so demonic and evil that he's much more monstrous.
So Freddy talked about searching the bowels of hell to find someone that can make people afraid, and we cut to a shot of Jason's hockey mask that's lying in a puddle of mud. But it looks more like the Jason Lives hockey mask and not the one that was dragged down to hell at the end of Jason Goes to Hell. But, whatever. Now that Jason has been introduced to us visually, Freddy finishes his monologue by saying that Jason may get the blood, but Freddy will get the glory.
We then cut to a young girl skinny dipping on a moonlit dock. She's waiting for Mike, but quickly strips off her clothes and dives into the apparently freezing cold water. There is a really great shot from high overhead of her swimming through the inky void that's echoed by another shot later on, but that's a little bit of nice artistic flourish that we'll get in this movie.
This reminded me a lot of the Camp Crystal Lake VR scene in Jason X, where it's the kind of stereotypical, buxom counselor that takes off her shirt, for no particular reason and just, jiggles around before diving into the lake. But at least we're in a real camp-like setting, it seems.
Mm-hmm. She gets spooked for some reason and gets out of the water, and with a thunderous thudding pace, we see Jason lumber out of the mists.
There was a really cool scene with Heather where when she gets out of the lake and she's kind of freaked out and she grabs her clothes and, realizes that something might be wrong, and she, just kind of scrambles to put her shirt back on. And we get like an extreme close up of her face looking off into the distance, and we don't see what she sees, but there's this like change in expression where she goes from like kind of like confused, frightened, like, what did I hear in the woods? And then all of a sudden her look changes to like complete terror when she, we're guessing it's Jason coming out of the shadows. And it's really great face acting, like it's very quick, and it's right up front, and the camera's right in her face, but it's just really great where it's just kind of like, I'm kind of scared to, oh my God, fuck. And it's like a really cool moment.
Awesome. She bolts in fear, trips and falls, and, runs through the woods, and kind of the usual things that these counselors do in these movies. At one point she's walking backwards and backs up thinking she's bumped into Jason, but it's just a tree, which I thought was, a cute little moment. She then creeps around the tree and is about to make a break for it, but Jason is there after all and skewers her against the tree with his machete. This girl was apparently named Heather. She was played by Odessa Monroe, who appeared in Final Destination 2 that same year, as well as the movie Saving Silverman, which was directed by Dennis Dugan, who I knew as a comedy actor in the late 70s and 80s. He was in a movie called The Unidentified Flying Oddball that I saw at a matinee double feature with The Jungle Book at the Marymount Theater. Oddly, Heather morphs into some other victims while pinned against the tree. Presumably these are other kids that Jason has killed over the years. One was played by Jamie Mayo, who appeared on The Dead Zone and Degrassi, The Next Generation. And the other was played by Blake Mawson, who was a random kid in X-Men 2 that same year. But then these victims also morph into another familiar face, Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees. Now, what's interesting to me here is Betsy Palmer turned down an offer to reappear in this movie. And that, frankly, it wouldn't make sense for her to show up here unless they had the ability back then to do some of this de-aging CGI work, because she would look 23 years older than she did the last time Jason saw her alive. So they couldn't cast someone who looked like Betsy Palmer. So I think instead they cast someone who looked like her severed head from part 2.
She's also wearing a burgundy turtleneck sweater instead of a blue cable knit sweater. But she does a fairly good voice impression of Betsy Palmer. And, she's like, Jason, my special, special boy. And then she She herself has her own little monologue, and she says, "Do you know what your gift is? No matter what they do to you, you cannot die. You can never die. You've just been sleeping, honey. But now the time has come to wake up. Mommy has something she wants you to do. I need you to go to Elm Street. The children have been very bad on Elm Street. Rise up, Jason. Your work isn't finished."
At which point we see Jason laying in this shallow grave in the woods, and his heart starts to pump again, and he emerges from this hole in the woods, which again does not match up to where we last saw him at the end of Jason Goes to Hell. But he stomps off.
Not to mention that we see one of his eyes open, but it's the eye that got run through by Tommy Jarvis in the final chapter.
Nice. We learn, unsurprisingly, that Pamela Voorhees is actually Freddy, imitating Jason's mother, which that explains why her sweater was red. I thought that was cute.
What I don't understand about seeing Jason's decomposed body is that when we first see it, it looks like he's lying on top of the ground, because we have a clear look at his torso and all the decay that's happened, but then we get a shot of him kind of clawing his way out of the ground. So was he buried there in the woods the whole time, and by whom? And, or is he supposed to be climbing out of hell?
I kind of got the sense that he'd almost like just, he lay where he fell. Someone, whether it was the events of Jason Goes to Hell or whatever, he was taken down and they just left him there. And the ground kind of covered up his arms and legs a little bit. Part of him was exposed to the air. He wasn't truly buried, but, shit just kind of grew over him almost.
So as Greg mentioned, it really wasn't Pamela Voorhees, it was Freddy. And he's going on to say that, Jason needs to make them remember Freddy and make them remember what fear tastes like. And it's just Freddy being the little stinker that he is.
We then cut to the title sequence with some skin being slashed open. It's really gross and kind of unpleasant, but it's mercifully brief.
It's also a terrible CGI.
Well, that's par for the course in this era. We then see Jason lumbering down a rain-swept Elm Street with 1428 dead ahead. Inside that house, three friends are playing Fuck, Marry, Kill with the Three Stooges as their subjects. Okay.
The house that we see certainly looks a lot like the original house from A Nightmare on Elm Street, but it's actually not. I've been to the actual house. It's in Hollywood, and this one is located in Vancouver. But I still had to do kind of like a quick side-by-side comparison of photos because it's pretty close. Like, they did a really good job of finding a house that looks close enough.
It's not in Ohio?
So the girl leading the Fuck, Marry, Kill game is a girl named Gib. She's a baseball hat-wearing party girl. And she points to an independent woman sitting on the couch named Kia. She tells her to choose between the Three Stooges. Kia says that she would kill Mo because he had a super bad toupee, and fuck the bald guy Curly, and that she would marry Larry.
What about Shemp?
And there's another girl sitting on the couch with Kia. This is Lori. Gibbs' next round of questioning involves Fred, Scooby, or Shaggy, so I really can't quite figure out what's going on in Gibbs' head. But as Lori and Kia are trying to figure out how to answer the question, Gib opens up a nearby window that she's sitting by and starts smoking a cigarette. It's storming outside, so the power briefly flickers off, and Lori gets up to find some candles, and Gib, who's still sitting on the windowsill, flicks her cigarette out the window. And we see that Jason is standing right outside, and the cigarette butt hits him square in the hockey mask.
I thought that was funny.
Me too.
Then Gibbs' douchey boyfriend Trey shows up with a drinky pal in tow. He establishes himself as an asshole right off the bat. And she apparently only puts up with his dude bro behavior because he has a cute ass.
Trey and Blake plop down on the couch while Kia and Lori are hanging back in the hallway. And Lori doesn't exactly seem thrilled that the guys are there, and I don't blame her because these two guys are just complete douchebags. Kia says that she invited them over because she didn't want Lori to be alone all weekend. And then Lori says something along the lines about the two guys not being her type. And then this is where we find out that Lori hasn't gotten over her first love, Will, since she was 14 years old. The power continues to flicker on and off, so Lori places some candles around the house, and Trey and Gib are making out in the corner. And Blake is sadly putting the moves on Lori by telling her that he likes the flow of her house and that it's got a good feng shui. After many teases, the power in the house finally goes out, and Trey and Gib head upstairs so he can get a quote-unquote massage. That leaves Lori, Kia, and Blake on the couch. And Blake is trying really hard to impress Lori, and Lori is completely unimpressed. We then get even more Lori exposition when we learn that Lori's mom recently died and that she's been a total bore ever since. Meanwhile, Blake is in the kitchen getting beers when he notices that the back door is wide open.
Upstairs, Gib and Trey have obviously finished rubbing sweaty bits. He doesn't like to be cuddled, so she gets up and gets into the shower, leaving him behind on the bed in his boxer shorts. That's where the segment ends, although if you go in slow motion, minute 13 actually begins on Gib in the shower with a bird's eye view, and within a split second then cuts over while still showing 13 minutes on the counter to Trey in bed. So it's a close call. It's a neck-and-neck race, but that made me laugh.
I'm just glad I didn't have to figure out how to censor that image for the minute marker.
The death count this episode is 4, kind of. We see the little girl killed in Freddy's backstory, and then Heather and the other 2 victims, although that probably didn't really happen, but, you know, for all intents and purposes, they died.
Dream demons.
Right, dream demons. So to find out which of the 3 Stooges Brian wants to fuck, come back next week.
So until then, you're all
doomed. Jabberjaw?